So IRIS.TV is a video data platform, and we really specialize in connecting video level data, so information about a piece of content, its metadata, its sort of physical attributes. So how do we connect that data to third-party contextual and brand safety partners that are there to analyze that piece of content? And then how do we build identifiers to then make that content addressable in the programmatic ecosystem? So we really think about ourselves as building the underlying API infrastructure for video level data to enable buyers and sellers to transact on the topic of content that an advertisement might run adjacent to.
All right, and how do you work with media companies and advertisers?
So we work with a lot of different constituents in the market. So think about it in my sort of visual left to right diagram. On the left-hand side, when we work with publishers, it's all about how do we ingest the raw metadata about their video libraries, and we do that by integrating with their content management systems and integrating all that rich data into our system. Titles, descriptions, keywords, the URLs of those videos, perhaps closed caption files. So how do we intake that data, step number one? And then, as you can imagine, the data from all of those different publishers is in different nomenclatures. And so we have to go through a normalization process on how do we organize and standardize that data so that it can be addressable across the ecosystem. So it's a big cleanup process. So when we work with a publisher, it's about how do we ingest that data, how do we normalize that data, and then the third element is how do we enrich that data. So really what the IRIS platform will do is connect that normalized data to industry standard contextual and brand safety vendors that want to analyze that piece of content in their own unique ways. Very similar to what's done by analyzing text on a web page. So we connect those pieces of content with third-party contextual and brand safety partners, allow them to analyze that content, and then return their definitions, third-party verified definitions, to the publisher so that they can enrich their bid stream data with third-party contextual and brand safety information. So think about our work with the publishers as how do we enrich those creative assets that they have in the market so that really they can drive up the CPMs, diversify that inventory to a buyer, offer different addressability elements, and really increase the revenue model. So that's sort of the constituent one. Constituent two is the plumbing partners, and those are our ad platform partnerships. And that includes our SSAI vendors and our ad servers, and those are partners that are activating the IRIS ID, which is an identifier that we assign to every video that comes into the IRIS platform. So those are activation partners. And then we have SSPs and DSPs, and those are really, of course, selling platforms and buying platforms. And it's really about how do they decode the IRIS ID and use it for targeting, or for measurement, or perhaps for reporting or planning. The IRIS ID is basically the equivalent to a user identifier, but for the piece of content, so it's just tied to that individual video. And so we're working with the SSPs and DSPs on how do they leverage the IRIS ID to package inventory based on the topic of content that a consumer is watching, something that's has been historically very difficult to do in, say, the CTV world. Or again, on the DSP side, how do they use that IRIS ID to perhaps do pre-bid targeting? So how do they positively target towards types of content that perhaps a consumer is viewing? Or how do they stay away from things that perhaps are not suitable for that brand message? So those are activation platforms, so the plumbing partners. And then on the far right-hand side, we have the buyers. And so the buyers are more of an indirect customer for us. It's really more about evangelism and having them understand that they do have the ability to run their brand message adjacent to types of content that resonate. And it's really an education process on where that's accessible, what type of media plan does that actually, is that best suited for? Of course, upper funnel, maybe we're going for broad awareness, maybe an auto manufacturer looking for just anyone watching auto-related content, or travel or food and beverage. It can be very broad. Versus at the bottom funnel conversion metric, like what is working and how do I measure that and determine that when I put my auto brand message in front of a consumer watching that 17-minute Land Rover video, that I get a higher conversion rate and being able to drive the performance metrics. So we sort of think about ourselves as a neutral platform, open to the whole ecosystem, and sometimes a lot of mouths to feed across the ecosystem.
Sounds like a very hyped up version of the text-based contextual that we all know and love from the display advertising world, which is really based on, its low-tech version is text-based. The highest tech version of it is speech to text. So how is this different from that earlier generation?
Yeah, I think contextual's been around for a really long time. It was sort of the beginning of digital advertising was all based on search queries and a really understanding, well, what is the consumer looking for, and what are they reading, and what are they desiring in that moment in time. And so nothing new about contextual, just maybe contextual's back a little bit now. What we saw when the display space started to obviously grow is that in between selling and buying platforms in a bid request, the page URL is always transferred. And it's a standard part of the OpenRTB spec. And when that happens, all page URLs are generally open domain. And that basically means that if anyone has that URL, they can access that page, which of course is the whole purpose of perhaps a journalist trying to get their article out there. So when that URL travels from the sell side to the buy side into, say, a DSP like the Trade Desk, it's very simple for them to pick up that URL, look at that web page, or send it to a third party who maybe is going to look at that web page, who then crawls the text on the page and does some semblance of semantic analysis and determines, is that safe or is that suitable? And it's all based on the text on the page. Now, one of the things that we've been working on is that there's been a huge technological limitation from that type of technology, which is basically open and addressable to anyone in the ecosystem because the ecosystem supported the concept of page URLs, is that video URLs are not passed in the bid stream. And so that piece of video that ad opportunity is going to run adjacent to never goes to the DSP. And it's never able to be analyzed and to be crawled. And there's two reasons for that. One is that publishers obviously don't want to send out their prized possession of their content so everyone can steal and pirate their inventory. And the second reason is that even if they did pass the URL, is that all of the content lives under sort of a lock and key with systems under sort of digital rights management, which make it inaccessible. And so really in order to provide transparency in a CTV world, you had to build a very different set of infrastructure which connected the content management systems where all of this data lives, as we sort of ran through that workflow, make it addressable so that a data partner can unlock what is very rich data, sight, sound, motion. There's a lot of insight inside a piece of video versus an article, and then connect that with that said DSP, perhaps the Trade Desk. So again, context's been around a long time. It's just sort of maybe 3.0 coming to fruit.